So hello everybody, we're ready to go. It was 1 minute past 1, which is great. I'll say a few words later on, but I just at this moment want to welcome Dr. Derek O'Byrne, who is the Vice President for Academic Affairs, who is going to open the conference on behalf of the university, the South East Technological University, and we're here on the Waterford side of the university. There's another whole side to it in Carlow, and the two have come together to form this new university just over a year ago. So we're very privileged that Derek is going to open the conference on behalf of all of us to welcome you all, and may we have a great time together, and we will.
Thanks, Michael. I have to say it's great seeing the energy in the room, just as we were taking pictures there a few minutes ago. It's great to see the kind of excitement of the conference I think that we're about to have, or you're about to have. And it's always, as academics, it's always great to see that kind of energy, and that's really what universities are about, and what we need to be energising throughout society. So it's my job, I suppose, just to welcome you all to SETU, and Michael gave you a good introduction to what SETU is. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome you here for what is your 7th, I understand, international conference. And I think we're honoured if, as I understand, you're the first time outside of the UK and to have it here in Waterford. And I think that's actually kind of interesting as well, because in welcoming you, I'm actually welcoming you to the oldest city in Ireland. Okay, so if you get an opportunity to look around, massive amount of heritage and history around the city, so please do take that opportunity. And I'm also welcoming you to one of Ireland's newest universities. Okay, and that's an interesting point, I suppose, as well, when you juxtaposition that old and new, and the idea of renewal and regeneration. But while we are one of the newest universities in the country, we are, as Michael said, established from two long-established old institutions, and combined now, we have around 18,000 students and a very strong national and international research and engagement record. And you can see that from some of the, delighted to see some of the signs here that identify that. And the reason I suppose I'm telling you this is that within that heritage, there might be something that might be surprising for an organisation with technology in the title of its university. Okay, and going back for a long time, I'm delighted to see Michael Howlett here, who was one of the founders and leaders in one of our institutions of heritage, first forming a general arts degree. And not only was it a general arts degree, but it was an arts degree that had religion and spirituality and all of that stuff embedded within it. And we've been doing that for many years. And that has led us on to the kind of research profile that we've started developing as a new university, and our commitment long-term into that development. And it's those type of activities that brought Michael O'Sullivan and his team to the university as well. So now we boast quite an engaged portfolio in the space. And that's very important work to us. And it's very important work to us for a very important reason. That while we are a technologically, regionally embedded university, while we recognise our commitment and our absolute desire to develop the region, we also know regionality involves connections, and it involves identity. And in that regard, we recognise the need to connect us nationally and internationally, but also for us and our remit to go beyond what might be termed economic development, to address society's need more holistically, and particularly society's need to reflect upon itself and to build a social and emotional identity that helps a region develop and thrive. And I can see no better reason than to have a conference like this in the city than that reason itself, that very fundamental principle we as a university are espousing. So our aspirations as a modern university really fit well with this conference here over the next few days. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you here on our campus. I'm absolutely delighted that it's an affirmation of our belief in where society needs to go and the kind of debates that societies need to have. And I truly hope you enjoy your 3 days here and the facilities and resources here of the university. And I hope what you see is a strong welcome from us here in SETU. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. It is my privilege to be welcoming you all on behalf of the Executive Committee at INIS in my role as the newly appointed chair, which I feel very privileged to occupy, and taking over from David Rousseau, who has played such a wonderful role over the last few years. It is amazing. The atmosphere here has already been generated, I think, and over lunch with the Irish band, it's really helped contribute to the Irish spirit that is going on here. And I do know that we'll have a wonderful few days here. I'm really looking forward to it. So, yeah, having all of you here, and I think we represent 27 countries. With a membership of about 150 people. So I think that is quite phenomenal. And already I've spoken to people who've travelled a real distance to get here. So thank you especially to those of you who've come there. I'm going to very briefly just say thank you to Michael for all he's done to get us here, the work he's done phenomenally, don't say that very easily, and all the kind of support that he's had along the way. We're at a stage of developing as INSS, and over the next few days, hopefully you'll get the chance to talk about that and have ideas about it. But just to let you know, even at this very early stage, that for both of you, for any of you who are there at the end of the last session on Thursday, we're going to be having a kind of plenary where if you've got any ideas for where you think INSS should go, or any would like to become more involved yourself in its development, then please let us know. And that last session will give us the opportunity to discuss that and share ideas. So welcome everybody, and look forward to these next 3 days.
So, hello everybody. I'm Michael O'Sullivan. I was sending out all those emails to you over the last... Anyway, hope it was helpful. A very special welcome to our friends from Thailand. We have 3 Buddhist friends here from Thailand, and as Joe mentioned, we have people from so many countries who've travelled a long way, Australia, for example, and so on. So I always want to say to you that there are 2 fire escapes, if anything happens, up at the top there on your right and to your left, and similarly down here, just to cover that point, should anything ever like that happen, which of course it won't. And just to say too that, you know, this is the only university in Ireland where there are applied spirituality studies going on at postgraduate level, MA and PhD level, and where we have a research group in spirituality studies, the SPIRSOC group, Spirituality in Society and the Professions, and where we also have a research fellow appointed to work with Bernadette Flanagan on producing what will be a groundbreaking book on a handbook published by Routledge about contemplative methods for the study of spirituality. So this is a great university for spirituality studies in Ireland, and it's very fitting therefore that this first conference outside the UK by the International Network for the Study of Spirituality should come to Waterford and to SETU, the South East Technological University. So I don't want to take up any more time because we're going to have a very, very good opening presentation from Dr. Cheryl Hunt, and I want her to have the time that she's entitled to have. So on that note, I say welcome everybody. Céad Míle Fáilte, a really 100,000 welcomes in the Irish language to you all from everywhere around the world. Have a great time here together, and let's all learn together as well, as I know we will, in this very important subject area that's reaching out across the world into all professions and all aspects of life. Thank you very much.
Okay, in a different capacity this time, I'm here as chairing the keynote presentation, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce as our first keynote speaker, Dr. Cheryl Hunt. Cheryl has had a long experience in education. She's an honorary fellow at the University of Exeter, where she was formerly the Director of Professional Doctorates. Cheryl is founding director and trustee of the International Network for the Study of Spirituality, and also the founding editor of the Journal for the Study of Spirituality, which was over how many years ago? Been around
13.
now? 13 years ago. The actual anniversary for it happened through COVID, so it was quite a quiet anniversary, but yes, a sustained for a long time now. Most recently, she is the author of the wonderful book, Critical Reflection, Spirituality and Professional Practice, which I can highly recommend and which has guided the whole planning of this conference, as you will see from the title of it. I'm delighted that Cheryl agreed to give this first keynote lecture, doing reflective practice and understanding spirituality as a way of being, implications for professional and transformative practice. So thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very aware of all Michael's admonitions about time, so I'm just getting my clock out here. Thank you for the introduction, Jane. And good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to see you. And I'd like to begin by thanking the INES exec, not only for the invitation to give this talk, but for deliberately incorporating the title of my book into the conference title. I feel very honoured by that. So it should be. This is the title of my talk, as Joan said, about doing reflective practice, looking at understanding spirituality as a way of being. This is how I got into spirituality, actually through the process of reflective practice. And I will try and look towards the end at some of the implications for professional and transformative practice. So this is the title of the book that Joan has just mentioned. I didn't actually pay her to give me the plug, but thank you. And I will say a bit more about each of those concepts. And in a minute, I'll give a brief outline of what I'm hoping to cover along the way. But since the image is on the screen, I thought I'd start with just a short anecdote about choosing the cover for this book. The publishers asked me to find an image on either of two specified websites that would best represent the title and the contents of the book. Well, that sounded simple, except that each of the sites contains something like 400 million images. So it was quite scary. I actually thought my life was going to be over before I'd worked my way through them. However, there were a number of factors to narrow down the choice. I wanted turquoise in there somewhere because it's a colour that's often associated with spirituality. In ancient cultures, for example, turquoise gems were treasured as a divine gift with protective properties. And it was believed they contained powerful vibrations which, when they were released, would connect humankind with the great unknown. So that's the rationale for the cover of our journal, in case you were wondering. Water, too, is associated with spirituality because of its life-enhancing properties. And so that seemed a good idea for the book cover, as did the idea of reflections in still waters. But the link to professional practice was more problematic. It obviously needed people in there, but then issues arose around diversity, inclusion, and images that might inadvertently have suggested some inappropriate relationship between the figures. Anyway, this image overcame all of those difficulties, but there were other reasons why I knew it was the one. Okay, so there's a bit of poetic license there because they're technically shadows rather than reflections. But I quite liked that because it reminded me of Plato's cave and the idea that we can spend our whole lives looking at the shadows that we believe to be real whilst remaining ignorant of or simply forgetting the bigger reality, the mystery that encompasses us and all that we do. However, the clincher here was when I discovered that this photograph was taken on Heron Island, which is apparently a small coral island off the coast of Queensland, Australia. And it's not the location that's significant, but the name. As I'll demonstrate shortly, the work of John Heron has been central to my own work. And before I leave that picture, I like to fantasize that what the people are looking at over the bridge, that little blob near the top of the picture, is a turtle. And the significance of that will become apparent later. So along the way, these are the main topics I'm intending to cover. What does it mean to do reflective practice and what makes it critical? Different ways of knowing, drawing on John Heron's pyramid of fourfold knowing, and a possible relationship between knowing, spirituality, and professional practice. And then in conclusion, I'll say a bit about the transformative potential of reflective and professional practice. And then I'll hand over to you for any questions or comments you may have. So first, what is reflective practice? I know many of you will have been engaged in forms of reflective practice for many years, so please bear with me for a while if I cover familiar ground for a moment. Incidentally, I'm going to use the abbreviation RP from time to time just because keep repeating the phrase reflective practice can get a bit tedious, and not to mention tongue twisting. So, there is an old saying about reflective practice that it's what makes the difference between having 20 years experience and 1 year's experience 20 times over. And that's because, to use a maxim from neuro-linguistic programming, if you always do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And for many practitioners, I think perhaps at the beginning of their professional career especially, RP is, as this image suggests, mainly about thinking about one's practice, often in the light of something that's gone wrong, probably mentally beating oneself up over it and trying to work out ways to not let it happen again. That approach was certainly at the root of my own practice when I became a trainee teacher more years ago than I'm going to admit, but well before Don Shern coined the term, the reflective practitioner. I spent the first part of my professional life in adult and community education, and reflection on my practice was a bit hit and miss, to say the least. I didn't really engage with RP as either a concept or a practice, a structured process, until probably the mid-90s, when I became a tutor in a university department of adult education. And I took on the directorship of a part-time master's program. The program incorporated a module on RP, which ran alongside the other modules for the full 3 years of the course. And students were encouraged to reflect on aspects of their own professional practice and their studies, and to review both in the light of appropriate educational theories. And by that time, Shern's work had become so popular, it was often referred to as a bandwagon. Now, many people had jumped on the bandwagon, and with their own versions of reflective practice in the form of articles, books, courses, techniques, you name it. Not all of it was actually true to the spirit of Shern's work, which I'll come to shortly. Stephen Brookfield claimed that the term reflective practice was, and I quote, so overused it was in danger of becoming a buzzword, denuded of any real meaning, of taking on the status of a premature ultimate like motherhood or democracy, a concept that once invoked stops any critical debate dead in its tracks. When we set up the module, the master's module, I'm ashamed to say that I and the 3 other tutors who were to be involved in it were blissfully unaware of the fact that we were joining a bandwagon. Having read The Reflective Practitioner, we decided to work together as a reflective group to try to articulate, document, and better understand the work that both we and our students were doing. Brookfield's Becoming a Critically Reflective Teacher was published a decade after Schoen's seminal text, and just before the first run of the master's programme and our reflective group were drawing to a close. I've likened reading it at that point to having struggled to find one's way across really difficult terrain, only to come across a roadside map of the entire territory with a big arrow saying, "You are here." And Brookfield actually points out that academic literature and theories can help us to name our practice. His work certainly did that for me. As the title suggests, his book is aimed at educators at all levels, but I think it has much to offer professionals in any field. And before I say more about both Schoen's and Brookfield's work, I want to share an image with you which I love because it's so indicative of the reaction that much of my own work on reflection, autoethnography, and indeed spirituality has evoked over the years. It's an image from a birthday card a friend once sent me, and I'll let you have a look at that for a moment. Yes, it made me laugh when I first opened it. So you can obviously interpret that for yourself, but I hear the voice off, the loud, "Are you getting up or not?" as that of many people, often in powerful positions within academia, who see little value in exploring or studying subjective experience. The voice of the person in the bed is a reflective voice. It's probably the voice of an autoethnographer, perhaps, certainly someone who's interested in how the world is storied, how we make meaning of it, including of who and what we are. So for me, as I'll try to demonstrate, attempting to understand how we make meaning and how that meaning shapes everything we do and how we do it is a vital element not only of reflective practice, but of education itself. So let's have a closer look at what Don Schoen had in mind when he first pointed to the need for professionals to become reflective practitioners. Schoen had observed that when asked to speak about their practice, many professionals did so in terms of what he called espoused theories, the theories they were taught during their training. And he referred to these theories as the product of the high, hard ground of academia, much influenced by the processes of technical rationality. Technical rationality being a belief that the world is out there, solid, objective, and measurable. In such a context, as Schoen pointed out, professional knowledge and practice is simply about applying scientific theory and technique to everyday practical situations. He contrasted this rather simplistic view with the reality of working in what he called the swampy lowlands of practice, where, I quote, "situations are confusing messes incapable of technical solution and usually involve problems of greatest human concern." So down in the swamp, as most of you here will know, professionals have to act pragmatically in the moment of each unique situation, drawing on what they know in here, the theories and approaches that they have developed in use as a result of their own professional experience, beliefs, and intuitions. Ironically, many who jumped on the bandwagon of RP following Schoen's work understood, developed, and critiqued his work largely from the standpoint of technical rationality, focusing on particular techniques and cognitive processes, especially analysis and solution finding. Brookfield's view is that rather than being about techniques, RP is a process of, and again I quote, standing outside ourselves and reviewing what we do from as many angles as possible. The purpose is to try to see how our values and beliefs underpin the choices we make and what we then do. For Brookfield, it's about hunting the assumptions we make about people, situations, relationships, and the world in general. Brookfield invites us to do this using 4 different lenses in order to look at how our own autobiography, what's happened to us in the past, influences what we are and what we do now. To look at what we do through the eyes of our students or clients, patients, all those with whom we interact as professionals. To look at how our colleagues experience what we do. And finally, to look at what we do in the light of theoretical frameworks and research. As Schoen was, Brookfield is very aware that professional practice is enacted. It's not just about taking something from there and applying it over there in a world that lies outside of oneself. It's about drawing on one's embodied knowledge, on what's in here. But one of Brookfield's main concerns is that what's in here is based on a lot of cultural assumptions about the way the world is, including about roles and relationships and who has the power to make decisions and to shape our societies and communities. He describes the concept of critical reflection as, quote, the uncovering of power and hegemony. It's in the tradition of what's known as critical pedagogy, developed by educators such as Paulo Freire, who have worked in the interests of social justice with communities suffering from various forms of oppression, helping them not only to solve practical problems, but to understand and effect change in the social and political circumstances which may have given rise to the problems in the first place. Now, how people behave in the world depends very much on how they view it, literally on their worldview. For example, if you believe that the world is flat, you're not going to put yourself in a position where you might fall off the edge of it. There's an apocryphal story, which many of you may know, about William James, the granddaddy of modern psychology. He was talking to a client who believed that the world rested on the back of a giant turtle. And in answer to his question about what held the turtle up, his client claimed it was another turtle. Asked what held that up, she replied in exasperation, "Why, surely you know, Professor, it's turtles, 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 all the way down." It's because of that story that a turtle has long been my own personal symbol for meaning making. And I used this particular black and white image at the start of each chapter when I was writing the book, largely to remind myself to keep considering where what I was writing was coming from. And that's quite interesting. And when I come to Heron's ways of knowing, you can think about the number of different ways that one's writing emerges. It's not just a continuous flow of words. It's affected by so many other things. So the turtle was there to remind me about where things were coming from and how I was making meaning out of what other people had said and other things that I had read. So I was really pleased when the publishers were persuaded to keep my turtles in. In working with postgrad students and groups with whom I've discussed the turtle story, I occasionally ask the question, are we talking turtle? It's actually to suggest that we may be at cross purposes in a discussion because what we're each saying is the product of a different worldview. And to illustrate what I mean by that, just consider this image. I've always seen that as a candlestick rather than a vase. Its official title is the Rubin vase, optical illusion, which was named after a Danish psychologist. I'd always thought it was a candlestick until I was researching for the book. But in one of the first articles I wrote, I used the image to discuss why community education, in which I'd long been involved, was under huge threat from government policy in the UK, but particularly in England. And an enormous withdrawal of funding, which was just making things more or less difficult to continue in the way that we had been working. It's a very long story involving the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, which I won't go into because it's too depressing. But the point was that those of us following the traditions of critical pedagogy were working in the world of the faces, almost literally. We were working with people closely in their communities, developing their learning alongside them. And the government was actually imposing some pretty hard-edged policies shaped by the ideology of its own candlestick world. And it seemed evident that the inhabitants of that, mainly technical rational world, had little understanding of life in the faces world, treating it, as this image suggests, simply as the background to their own dominant ideology and policies. It was through the study of what actually constitutes community that I first began to explore the concept of spirituality. I had become intrigued by Raymond Williams's observation, a well-known sociologist and historian, about community that, I quote again, unlike all other forms of social organisation, community never seems to be used unfavourably and never given any opposing term. It seemed to me that it was a concept that was associated with oneness and interconnectedness. Those were the words I was working with. I hadn't moved into thinking about spirituality at that point. It was the work of John Heron that helped me to understand not only why that might be, but why, as if to deny the very quality of oneness, worldviews can be so radically different and oppositional. So I'll just leave that for you to have a look at for a moment, and then I'll say a bit more about it. Heron suggests that we have 4 different ways of knowing, and he presents them in the form of what he calls a dynamic pyramid, in which what is below supports, grounds, and empowers what is above. This slide shows the terms that Heron uses to describe his extended epistemology of 4 different kinds of knowledge. At the top is practical knowledge, which is exhibited in the exercise of a skill. Upholding it is propositional knowledge, what we know in terms of words and concepts. It's where the espoused theories lie. In the world of technical rationality, of the candlestick, those forms of knowledge are all there is to professional practice, knowing about the theories and techniques and applying them. But underpinning those forms of knowledge is what technical rationalists tend to view as irrational knowledge. Heron calls part of that presentational knowledge, knowledge in the form of wordless patterns and images, or, if in words, in the form of poetry and metaphor. At the base of the pyramid the ground on which the whole thing stands, is experiential knowledge. That's Heron's term, which is slightly confusing for people in education because experiential learning is something seen as slightly different. But it's Heron's term for our sense of beingness, the sense that simply tells us, I am. It's a completely wordless understanding. We can't share it in the way that we can share the other forms of knowledge. We just are it. This slide is my attempt to use presentational knowledge in the form of images to illustrate what I've just described using propositional knowledge. So ignore the bit at the bottom for now. The middle column shows Heron's terms, and on the right is a simplified description of them. On the left are images which, for me, are representative of each of the concepts. The image I've used for practical knowledge is the one I used earlier to depict Schoen's swampy lowlands of practice. You can't actually see them in this shrunken form, but words like action, beliefs, emotions, feelings are scattered across this network of connections to illustrate how all of those things combine and emerge in practice. The propositional image with the head, or perhaps I should more properly say the left hemisphere of the brain, full of words and concepts, is fairly self-explanatory. I was drawn to the presentational image because I felt it evoked the faces candlestick idea and the creating of worldviews. And lastly, I chose the image for experiential knowledge, knowledge of our beingness, because it reminded me of the lines in Shelley's poem Adonais, that life, like a dome of many-coloured glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. The section at the bottom of this model is significant because, although he doesn't overtly include it in his pyramid, Heron refers to the void. It's a concept and image which has coloured my own exploration of spirituality. I've suggested in the book and elsewhere that there are two kinds of spirituality, which I called transpersonal and transcendental. The first acknowledges that for many people there is nothing beyond the known and knowable material world and universe. That view is represented here by the box that is actually drawn round the four ways of knowing. Within the box, I think it's experiential knowledge, our knowledge of beingness, that gives rise to the experience of community, of oneness with others. It's a universal trait. It comes just with being alive. And it seems to be recognised not only in transpersonal practice and research, but in what is now often called secular spirituality. Transcendental spirituality, on the other hand, admits that there may be something, in inverted commas, outside the box. Rather than that being a balancing act of turtles, although I have to say those turtles are out there, they're actually there in a number of indigenous as well as ancient Hindu creation stories. Lots of stories about turtles and their influence on the world. So it's not a complete fantasy of William James's client. Heron speaks of the void being beyond the known and knowable universe. Others call it, amongst other things, God, consciousness, the Absolute, the Tao, Brahman, and Spirit. It is the locus of creation, and in Heron's terms, it enters the material universe via the agency of each individual. In other words, we each embody an aspect of the void, or whatever name you give to it. My own preferred term is spirit with a capital S, and I see spirituality as the way in which the formlessness and wordlessness of spirit with a capital S is embodied and expressed in the material world. As you can probably tell from the words in the browny red colour on this diagram, I see worldviews and religions as an expression of spirituality, not the other way around. In my view, religions emerge from the embodied, wordless, experiential knowledge of spirit as it expresses itself through the imagery and stories of our various cultures. I've suggested on here, in another one of the browny red lines, that there is a creative space between knowledge that is essentially private and that which is evidently in the public domain. And I think it's somewhere in this space that our felt and imaginal experiences get translated into the words, ideas, theories, and doctrines that give structure to our lives. And it's at what I've labelled the practice-theory interface that we have to sort out, often without even being fully aware of the process, what aspects of all the accumulated knowledge below, in all its different forms, is appropriate in any given moment to enact in our professional practice. William James, he of the turtle story, said that we are born into one blooming, buzzing confusion and spend the rest of our lives trying to sort it out. I think reflective practice is an excellent way of trying to sort it out, especially in a professional context, provided that we ask the right sorts of questions. I found the work of Parker Palmer particularly helpful in that respect. He's concerned mainly with the practice of teaching, but like Brookfield's, I think his work can be applied in most professional contexts. Palmer says the questions we most commonly ask about practice is the what question. In an educational context, what subjects shall we teach? When the conversation goes a bit deeper, we ask the how question. What methods and techniques are required to teach well? Occasionally, when it goes deeper still, we ask the why question. For what purposes and to what ends do we teach? But seldom, if ever, do we ask the who question. Who is the self that teaches? How does the quality of my selfhood form or deform the way I relate to my students, my subject, my colleagues, my world? I'm sorry about this slide, it's a bit difficult to see on screen, but I've extracted it from my book to show how I think Palmer's questions relate to Heron's ways of knowing. In other words, how different kinds of questions tap into different forms of knowledge. The pressures of technical rationality incline us to focus primarily on the what and how questions. Just think how many staff meetings or meetings at work that you've had where you've asked what and how and never went any further. No comment. And I have to say certain aspects of critical reflection also do that in seeking to effect social and political change in a world that's out there. It's about something that's outside of myself that I need to change. And similarly, even some debates about the nature of transformative learning have also focused on outcomes. But to do so in any context, I think, is to neglect the properties and the power of our inner worlds, to neglect the question of why we believe and act in certain ways, and certainly the question of who is believing and doing. Now, I know Michael's going to talk about authenticity at the other end of the conference, but it's perhaps worth noting here that Palmer very clearly associates the notion of being authentic with the who question, about tapping into one's experiential knowledge. I've placed the word vocation where it is. It's the bottom bluey coloured line. Because, as Palmer notes, vocation does not mean a goal that I pursue. It means a calling that I hear. And he suggests that, and I quote again, we are like plants full of tropisms that draw us towards certain experiences and repel us from others. If we can learn to read our own responses to our own experience, a text we're writing unconsciously every day we spend on earth, we will receive the guidance we need to live more authentic lives. In my view, what he's saying there is that if we deliberately tap into our experiential knowledge, into our sense of beingness, then the calling of spirit with a big S will, if we allow it to do so, lead us along the pathways that will best enable us to express our own form of spirituality, to recognize and to enact in practice who we truly are in a way that is unique to each of us. Looking inwards seems to me to be the key to this. As Palmer says in relation to teaching, but I think it applies in other contexts as well, teaching, like any truly human activity, emerges from one's inwardness, for better or worse. As I teach, I project the condition of my soul onto my students, my subject, and our way of being together. When I do not know myself, I cannot know who my students are. I will see them through a glass darkly, in the shadows of my unexamined life. And when I cannot see them clearly, I cannot teach them well. When I do not know myself, I cannot know my subject, not at the deepest levels of embodied personal meaning. I will know it only abstractly, from a distance, a congeries of concepts as far removed from the world as I am from personal truth. So I think to look inwards in order to know oneself and one's subject through embodied personal meaning, and then to profess it, whether in the act of teaching or of providing care or any other service, seems to me to be the very essence of being a professional. But being a professional is not a static thing. It's a developing process involving alignment between what is required out there of us and what we know in here. It's about looking both outwards and inwards. Patricia Cranton's work on professionalism argues for just such an holistic perspective. And she associates the ability to take such a perspective with both transformative learning and achieving authenticity. And for me, that two-way vision lies at the heart of both professional and reflective practice. Because, as Cranton put it, we need to know who we are and what we believe, and then act on that. Building on Cranton's research, Caroline Krieber describes authenticity as a process of transformative learning, of objective and subjective reframing, of redefinition and reconstruction. In short, a process of becoming. If spirit enters our known and knowable world through the agency of each individual, then I believe we each have a responsibility not only to acknowledge and feel its presence, but to explore and understand how it finds expression through our various ways of knowing, and how we may become, through those, all that we can be. Before I go on to my final summary slide, I think I might have just time to include something which I came across too late to incorporate into the slides. It's a poem which was published in a recent newsletter that I received from the Sacred Space Foundation, which is an organisation in the English Lake District which offers spiritual retreats and guidance. And there was a poem in there which is soon to be published in a book entitled Regenesis. It was written by Christopher Drummond, one of the foundation's trustees, and I have his permission to read it to you shortly. But I was first drawn to it because the lines are written in the form of a shape, which I'm sorry I couldn't put on a slide, but you might just be able to see it here. This is, I've put the words in this shape in the middle, and it just spoke to me of the candlestick. Admittedly, it's not so good on the faces, but it certainly had that feel about it. And apart from the shape of it, the poem seems to me to resonate with the whole notion of fourfold knowing. It certainly speaks to me of the void and experiential knowledge, that which is always here, which is the title of the poem. And it speaks of the imaginal realm of presentational knowledge and of disparate worldviews and their sometimes dire consequences that are reinforced by worldly desires and often by words and doctrines, by propositional knowledge. Anyway, see what you think. This is it. It's called Right Here by Christopher Drummond. It's just right here. Everything I want. My body relaxed like it used to be in childhood sometimes. A sunny day in May. Hints of summer, but not too hot. And the feeling of winter finally giving way. I can taste it when I stop. The place I'll never name, where imagination opens up and dreams make sense, and the forest feels alive because it is. It's the untroubled ease of desire at rest, the gnawing for more abated, like a whining gale wind that just suddenly stops, and the simple magic of deeper meaning revealed as not so deep at all. Wars are waged over the words written about what's always here. Countless lives ended in the name of the nameless and meaningless arguments, birthing and killing empires, reshaping the world because we're hungry for something real. But maybe after all, the line is a circle and there's nowhere to go. And stopping might be just as good as, or better than, pushing. And what choice do we really have anyway? The walls of my bedroom, an unmade bed, patchy snow outside the window, someone chopping wood, crows up the mountain doing what they do, and the ever-present invitation to feel my life the way I used to, as if I have everything I need, and fascination is my currency, and there's a great possibility brimming with each new breath. I thought that was rather nice, and I was pleased that he allowed me to share that with you. So, just in summary then, I believe that as we work in the swampy lowlands of professional practice, we need to look both outwards and inwards, and to explore and utilise our fourfold ways of knowing, and to ask the question that underpins them all: who am I? In doing so, we may knowingly engage in a process to enable the formlessness and wordlessness of spirit, with the capital S, to express itself in words and actions through our individual embodied spirituality. So that's my story of how things look from the back of my turtle. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. There are references there if anyone would like to see them at some stage.
Sit down.
I'll stay here for now.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Cheryl, for that absolutely wonderful presentation, in which I think you'll all agree there's a huge amount of not just knowledge, but wisdom. And I'll follow up what I said before, actually. For those of you who've not yet done so, if you're interested and attracted to the content, there is so much more in Cheryl's book. So
She's my agent.
I just think everybody should read it, really. So now we have how long for questions, Michael?
Where have you got the book there? 20 minutes? Yeah, great.
So 20 past 2.
About 17 minutes maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could
So
have
we're
slowed
going to
down.
have a process of... So would anyone like to ask a question? Yes.
Where is the... Oh, yes. Right, 1 second. In order to be recorded, you'll have to speak. You use the mic, Jane.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Cheryl. I do not know how I am not your student. Maybe spiritually I am. I think my work completely follows yours, so that was really inspiring. Can I ask you, us? I'm Janet Monaghan. I teach at the University of Education, and my concept is called Spiritually Aware Practice in Education. Can I ask you if you or we think it would be good to promote spiritual humans, what do we need to do in relation to the education of teachers?
You've got a lot of people here who are already involved in that, so I'm very happy if anyone wants to come in with any answers, because I know that's a large part of what people are doing here and through Spire. I think what we need to do is just keep talking about it and introducing it. It's quite difficult, actually, to talk about spirituality, particularly in universities. It's not a good career move.
I've noticed. I've noticed that. Yeah.
I found that a long time ago. But I'm quite inspired by, actually, Anita Roddick, who founded the Body Shop, because I remember seeing her at I think it was called TOES, the Other Economic Summit, which used to run when the main economic summit was running. And it must have been back in the 1970s, and she was on a stage with, I think, about a dozen men, all suited and booted, and she was there in vivid purples and turquoises and was wonderful. And she actually got up and talked about love, and you could actually feel the sort of, oh, where are we going with this? Can we deal with this? But she said the only way you can actually get people to understand a particular worldview is to enact it and to speak it to them and not be put down by the status quo, by the rationality. I think that's probably the same thing with spirituality, because as far as I'm aware, I mean, working with children are very open to it. So it's sad that, if teachers don't feel that they can bring that out, I think what we can do to work on that interface of working with children's spirituality and their understanding of the magical aspects of the world. We just need to keep talking about it, but it's very difficult to put it into module forms and course proposals and audits and all the rest of it. It's just a slog.
Well, it is, but is it the most important thing we can do? Because if we do think it's important to promote spirituality in human beings, then where would we do that? How would we do that? What is education for, if that's not what it's for?
Well, I agree with you. I think that is what it's for, that we need to actually find out, uncover a lot of information which is covered up by a lot of the technical rationality stuff that goes on and the filling in of the forms.
Thank you so much.
Okay, is there someone else who'd either like to ask a question, or Cheryl was saying there are teachers who've got this kind of experience, want to share any of that? There's one there, and then I saw one up there as well. Do you want to ask a question?
So that was a wonderful presentation. I'm Nasreen Lalani. I'm from Purdue University, US. So I was hearing like a lot about self-reflexivity, self-reflective actions, and spirituality, about becoming yourself or sense of beingness. So how would you place the concept of, so once there are definitions of spirituality around sense of being, your own self, but then that also says about shared connections or the shared humanity. So where would you, or where would we put that concept into spirituality while talking about sense of being, or within the realm of self-reflectivity?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Where would we put the discussion about the sense of beingness?
Yeah, so how would you kind of make a bridge between your own sense of being, and then there is also a concept of shared connection and shared humanity. So how would you amalgamate the both of those things under one umbrella of spirituality? Or how would you put that into the practice of self-reflectivity?
It can be done through the sharing of personal stories and personal journeys. I think personal stories are actually key to all of this. I don't know whether Noelia or anyone else who's working on the applied spirituality course wants to come in there, because I do understand that's a lot of what you do, actually working with people's own sense of beingness and how you actually take that into practice and share it with one another.
Noel, do you want to?
No, do you want, just before it be recorded, you'll have to use this. I'll be back to the lady there. It's okay.
Don't do a Prince Charles.
All those years of playing football.
I think part of the answer lies in Heron's concept of the experiential knowing, which we don't validate. Certainly in the academy, if you can't put it into propositional terms, then it tends not to be validated. I mean, a lot of the work I do is around meditation with children. So as Cheryl says about children having an innate capacity to be very comfortable with their spiritual nature without putting any words on it. And they take to meditation, very beautifully. So they have a clear understanding of spirituality. When I tried to find out from them as part of my doctoral research how they describe the fruits of meditation, the deeper fruits, they said things like meditation helps you to be yourself. Meditation helps you to feel the goodness inside. Because the nature of the work I was doing with them, I wasn't approaching it from a Christian perspective as such, and I wasn't using any theological or spiritual language or jargon. And yet they were able to give rich metaphorical expression to their own experience. And I think adults would find that quite difficult to do, because we tend to think everything has to be readily expressible in concepts and words. So I think there is something, and that's one of the wonderful things about the Masters in Applied Spirituality and the program that Michael and Bernadette offer here in this college, and that Noelia is now the director of that program. And there is a very strong experiential basis to it, where as part of it, every student is expected to explore their own spiritual autobiography and to develop the capacity to listen to others in a way that is mysticogically sensitive, that you are open to pick up the spiritual nature of what is being said.
Thank you.
There was a lady over here, first of all, if I may. I have to go back to.
1, 2, 3.
Back to you then.
Okay.
Can I get the second microphone, Michael?
Okay, no, that'd be great. Do. Thanks.
Michael's got a watch on doing
That'd be
steps.
helpful.
So,
Thank you so much. I'm Katharina Opalka. I'm a systematics theologian from Bonn University in Germany. And my question is a bit of a follow-up. Could you elaborate a bit more on the collective dimension of spirituality? And on the, especially in regard to spiritual settings. So from the back of my turtle, I have in mind like prayers, collective services, collective prayers and such things. How would you include that in the research? Or are, more pointedly, where's the where question in your list of questions?
Say that last bit again.
You had this list of questions, and I immediately wondered, where's the where? How, why, what?
Mm-hmm.
Could you include the where in
Yes.
there?
Yes. Models. Models only work in certain ways, don't they? You can't get everything into them. Yes, I'm not sure I can answer your question. I mean, and there are spiritual communities where the beingness is actually experienced within the group very clearly. I think the danger comes when the beingness is experienced as exclusive. We feel it, they don't. So, yes, I just think it's really important that groups actually come together to share their knowledge. And for me, that's what education is about. It's about actually sharing all those different worldviews and seeing not necessarily whether we can arrive at a synthesis, but at least an understanding of how each of those works and not try to knock down the other one. One of my colleagues famously said that working in academia was like being a cannibal because it was about my formula can eat up yours. And I've certainly been in lots of meetings where what someone has said has literally been an attempt to eat up what somebody else has said. And that can be translated into communities where you literally want to try and eat up or beat up another group that doesn't see things in the same way. I think it can only be done through sharing and genuinely listening to people.
Cheryl, so I'm Libby Tisdale from Penn State University in the U.S., and I loved your presentation. You knew I would. I've read her book, and it's fabulous. So, but I do have a question, and I want to preface my question with a story. I love the way that you use image. You know, your turtle, the candlestick. I love that. I think it's so important. And my little story is I have a 3-year-old grandson. And I have a picture in front of my computer of Noor Anisa Inayat Khan. I don't know if any of you know who she is, but she was the daughter of Hazrat Inayat Khan, who is an Indian Sufi who came to the U.S. In the 19-teens. And his daughter is Noor Anisa, and she was a social justice advocate and very into her spirituality, was very informed by spirituality, and she was killed in prison because she was in the French resistance and protesting Nazi Germany. So, so my little story about my grandson is he sees this picture in front of my computer and he says, "Yay, yay," that's what he calls me. "Yay, yay, is that Jesus?" And I was sort of stunned. And I said, "No." I said, "But that's a very holy woman." And I was sort of struck. And then I showed him a picture of Jesus. And he says, "Oh, that's Daddy Jesus." So out of the mouths of 3-year-olds. But what I was struck with is he sees the essence of some sense of spirituality that does social justice, you know, as a 3-year-old. And that probably will be encultured out of him eventually, sadly. So my question is, you talked about this twofold spiral. Well, you have a picture there of going inward and going outward. And so on the one hand, I see us as becoming, or at least those of us that are here, are deeply spiritual, and many people are. At the same time, the Donald Trumps of the world, seem to be taking over the world, which is very disheartening to me. So I'm curious if you could talk about the connection between what you've talked about and doing social justice. The outward. So you talk about spiraling inward and spiraling outward, which also connects to the community aspect of spirituality.
I'm not sure I can say an awful lot more about that. I mean, I think the spiraling outwards is about trying to take the inward out there, so the spiritual needs to go out there. What happens to it when it comes up against a Trump, I really don't know. And it's puzzled me for a long time how those very, very different worldviews can exist side by side with perfectly rational people appearing to believe in things that I think are totally irrational. And then I think, but they probably think that of me as well. So I don't really know how you can deal with that other than keep working towards the social justice where you see injustice, attempt to address it, to speak it, to bring it to people's attention, not just let it go by. And I think it's just going to be a very long, slow process. I remember reading a lot of the futurist, so it was called, literature back in the 70s and 80s, with people talking about the need for a breakdown before a breakthrough could come. It's almost like catastrophe theory. You come to a certain point, and only at that point can you change into something else. And I've thought we've arrived at that moment of breakdown on a number of occasions, but it just feels closer and closer at the minute. And I think you just have to be ready when it does break down to break through to something else. And that's why I find it so encouraging that there are so many groups that are actually talking spirituality, talking social justice. I just think we somehow need to knit ourselves together a bit more closely than we've done so far.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Todd, and then Yuresh after that.
Just to give a point of how far things need to go, and not to be overly pessimistic, but I'm thinking of an anecdote from the wife of my nephew, and this is in the States, and we have the Trumps and this reactionary thing, and one of the ironies is it's a paradox of competing spiritualities. She's teaching in a primary school situation, and she's not allowed to utter the term meditation or yoga or these things because it's a Christian fundamentalist that's saying that's attacking mine. And so that's how far things have to go. But it's fascinating that it's from a standpoint of a supposed spirituality that's ruling out those kids exploring their own. So. But there are some good, bright points in there, too, because the kids are asking the questions, and the teachers are allowed to answer the questions. They're just not allowed to initiate saying meditation.
Okay.
They can dance around it.
Yes, feed them the questions at the appropriate moment. I think it doesn't matter what you call it. Call it something that people will accept if you have to, but do what you think you should be doing.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. I am Naresh Singh. I teach applied spirituality and public policy in a university in India, the OP Jindal Global University. I heard a few questions that seem to revolve around the point you were making about the importance of knowing who am I, or maybe what am I, and especially for teachers to understand that before they proceed. To quickly react to that, I think one first misunderstanding that we probably should clear up is how to make humans spiritual. And the fact that most of us now know that we are spiritual. You don't have to become spiritual. It's about waking up to that reality. But in the journey, the experiential journey of finding out who am I or what am I, one recognizes, first of all, that one is something, an individual. And then one goes to the point of where one is nothing. whether it's Buddhist tradition or some other tradition. And then finally to the point where one is everything. So the idea of a shared consciousness, the beingness, does not pose what I would call a false dichotomy between beingness as an individual. As you become more and more aware of your true being, you are in fact shared. And the connectedness that we see physically, in fact, is there underneath already. So that I see as a false dichotomy, and it begins to, clarify lots of issues that arise as questions that can be resolved. But I have to thank you for resurrecting, if you like, Don Shun and Chris Argyris's work and bringing it in this context. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Probably, at the back. Probably have time for just one and possibly two questions, depending how quick.
Hi, Cheryl. Beth Crisp from Australia.
Oh, hi, Beth.
Just want to make a quick comment. I really liked your 4 ways of questions. You were saying that you go to meetings where there are sort of always the how and the what. I go to the meetings which are the why and the who, and I must say they're equally frustrating to not have the... Sometimes we need the pragmatic, and rather than getting... So I think we need all 4, and not just to sort of highlight the ones that we're not getting at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone else then, would you have?
We're near the end.
Go on, you've been here for a while.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful presentation. My name is Gulnar and I'm from University of East London. I just want to explore your ideas around, the last word here. It says locus of creation, void, and then realm of spirituality, question mark. So do you think that creation from existential point of view, maybe we can explore that it could be around the existential quest leading to void, or nothingness, or emptiness, and based on, again, transcultural views, it could be different. But when we talk about spirituality, it may not be the existential answers altogether in terms of void, or any sort of lack, or curiosity, because it could be abundance, it could be more than that. And that's why when a colleague asked about where or when, it could be timelessness. So what are your views on that? Because if you want to capsulate it under void, then it may not be maybe appropriation in terms of looking at the spiritual kind of lens rather than existential. So if you can separate it out in terms of meaning making, or in terms of reflection, or maybe in terms of further reflexive inquiry, what would be your views then? Thank you.
I think it's unfortunate that Heron does use that term, because it has got this sort of nihilistic feel about it. That's why I said other people have other names for it. I could have put God there, or spirit with a capital S, or anything else. And I think the key thing is what he says about whatever that is. And the words don't do it, because we're actually working in a completely wordless domain. But whatever is outside, for want of a better word, what we know, that does enter the material world. This is a slightly older diagram. I've changed this over the years, and I think I would now have spirit at the bottom with a capital S, because I now think of spirituality as whatever the name you give to that outside, how that becomes embodied in each individual. So I don't think it's a sort of existential crisis. I think it's about something entering the individual and recognizing that what has entered one's body in this particular existence is part of that bluey blackness out there. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to enact that. I think the enacting of spirituality is absolutely crucial. Don't know whether that answers your question. Okay.
We need to finish.
Yeah. So just thank you again, Cheryl, for a fantastic presentation.